Welcome back. Our next lesson will cover the rest of the verb tenses. But so far, we have learned simple present, simple past, present continuous, present perfect, and present perfect continuous. Now, we will cover every other verb tense in the present and past. These verb tenses have two things in common. They represent two events and they're not used as often as the first set of verb tenses that we've learned. So, during this lesson, we will learn with practical and specific examples of these verb tenses when they are required. First, let's look at past continuous. So, if this is time and this is now, this is past continuous. With the same formula as present continuous, to be plus ing, but conjugating to the past, was or were. The past continuous verb tense represents two events in the past that are simultaneous, or they are assumed to be happening at the same time. Two common adverbs to use with past continuous are when and while. Let's look at an example.
So, I'd like to look at one example of the past continuous. Remember that there are two events happening at the same time. First, Becky stood under a tree. At the same time, it began to snow. So we use the past continuous. Becky was standing under a tree when it began to snow. Don't forget that you can also use while.
Now that we know a little bit more about two events at the same time, what about two events which are separated by time? The verb tense for that is going to be past perfect continuous, which, if this were time and this were now, this would be past perfect continuous. This is a period that began in the past, was continuous, and stopped at some point in the past. So we will conjugate the verb to have to had plus been plus ing. Just like the present perfect continuous, the past perfect continuous needs two adverbs, since and for. With the same definition as since being a particular time and for being a duration of time, we will only add two other possible adverbs, when or until. So let's look at an example of past perfect continuous.
Now we're going to look at an example of the past perfect continuous. Remember that this tense also has two events. First, we were looking for a store that sells candy. If we have 4 hours that pass in between the time for the second event when we found a candy store, we have an event that started in the past, was continuous, but also stopped in the past. So we use the past perfect continuous. We had been looking for a candy store for 4 hours until we found one. Remember, instead of until, you can also use when.
Last, we have the past perfect. The past perfect tense represents two events in the past that need to be clarified as unspecific. We will conjugate the verb to have, to had, plus the past participle. This tense is often substituted for simple past because really it doesn't matter which event is mentioned first. Let's look at an example.
Now, let's look at past perfect. I will use myself for an example. Remember, this is also consisting of two events. We're assuming that the first came before the second, but we don't really know. First, I was a musician. Second, I became an English teacher. I had been a musician before I became an English teacher. Remember that this can be easily substituted for the simple past. I was a musician before I became an English teacher. As I said before, the two events are assumed to come before one another, so they're neither specific nor unspecific.
However, the past perfect tense has many cases where it is necessary, such as in conditional sentences and when we use the expression by the time. This is when the past perfect tense just makes it a little clearer which event happened first. Congratulations! You have learned every verb tense in the present and the past. So, for our next lesson, we will go over the pronunciation of ed verbs. Those are verbs that are regular in the past and past participle, as well as the future verb tenses. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.